The bundle sat folded, innocent, but something made him look closer. Tucked into the fabric, barely visible, was another folded paper. Micah's heart hammered. He glanced toward the house, toward the yard. No one was watching. Still, his hands shook as he lifted the cloth. The note was longer this time. I hope this finds you well. I wanted to say again how much your work means. I watch sometimes from the window and see how carefully you measure, how precisely you cut. My mother used to say that you can tell a person's character by how they treat the things no one else notices. You treat wood like it's precious. That says something true. I know this is improper. I know we should not correspond. But I find I cannot stop thinking about the door, about the painting, about the fact that someone can create beauty in a place that so often feels broken. If you wish to respond, you may leave a note beneath this cloth. I will understand if you do not. Some silences are safer than words. Micah read until he'd memorized every word. Then he tucked the note into his pocket with the first one and went back to work, his mind spinning. She wanted him to respond. She'd given him permission to write back. But writing back meant risk. It meant stepping into something that could destroy them both. The overseer would call it insolence. Her father would call it worse. And Jonas was always watching, always looking for reasons to make someone hurt. Micah should ignore the note, should pretend he never saw it. But that night, after supper, thin stew of cornmeal and pork fat, he sat by the dim light of a tallow candle and pulled out a scrap of paper he'd saved from the big house trash. It was torn at the edge, stained with what looked like tea, but it would do. He had no proper pen, only a piece of charcoal wrapped in cloth. He thought for a long time before he began to write. Miss Evelyn, I received your note. I reckon I should not answer, but your words were kind, and kind words are rare enough that I cannot let them pass without acknowledgement. My mother taught me to work with care. She said that even if we do not own the things we make, we own the making. That is ours alone. I hold to that teaching. You should know this is dangerous, for both of us, but especially for you. Folks do not understand kindness that crosses certain lines. They make it into something it is not. I will leave this beneath the cloth as you asked, but please, be careful. Some eyes see everything, and not all of them are friendly. Respectfully, Micah. He read it over 3 times, then folded it small and tight. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, he slipped into the workshop and tucked the note beneath the cloth bundle, exactly where hers had been. Then he went to work, trying not to think about whether she would find it, trying not to hope. The day crawled by. Micah cut boards for the pantry shelves, sanded them smooth, fitted the joints with care. His hands worked automatically while his mind raced. What if she didn't check the cloth? What if someone else found the note first? What if Jonas had been watching and was already planning something cruel? By afternoon, Micah had nearly convinced himself to retrieve the note, to tear it up and forget the whole thing. But when he returned to the workshop after the midday water break, the cloth bundle was gone. His stomach dropped. He searched the workbench, the floor, even the corners of the room. Nothing. She'd taken it, which meant she'd found the note. Micah tried to work, but his hands felt clumsy. He dropped his hammer twice and cut a board a half-inch too short. The other men noticed, but said nothing. Everyone had bad days. Everyone carried weights no one else could see. As the sun began its slow descent toward the tree line, Micah was cleaning his tools when he heard footsteps. He looked up. Jonas stood in the doorway. He was a lean man, all angles and sharp edges, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink. He worked for the overseer, but acted like he owned the place, like every slave was his personal property to command. You've been spending a lot of time in here, Jonas said, his voice flat. Micah kept his expression neutral. Got work to do. That's so. Jonas stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the workshop. Funny thing. Miss Evelyn's been coming by here more than usual too. You noticed that? No sir. Jonas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You sure about that? 'Cause I notice things. I notice when folks linger where they shouldn't. I notice when patterns change. Micah said nothing. Silence was safest. Jonas walked slowly around the room, running his finger along the workbench, the tool rack, the stack of lumber. You make good shelves, he said. Real careful work. Master Harrow's pleased with you. Be a shame if something changed his mind. I aim to keep doing good work, Micah said carefully. See that you do. Jonas stopped at the door. And Micah, keep your head down, eyes on your work, nowhere else. Then he was gone, his boots crunching on gravel as he walked away. Micah stood frozen, his heart pounding. Jonas knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious, enough to be watching. He should end this now. Should never write another word to Evelyn, never acknowledge another note. It was the only way to stay safe. But when he finally left the workshop and headed back to the quarters, he found himself thinking not about Jonas, but about the words Evelyn had written. You treat wood like it's precious. That says something true. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever looked at his work and seen him in it. Dangerous or not, he couldn't let that go. 3 days passed. Micah worked, ate, slept, and tried not to think about the notes hidden in his wall. He kept his head down, just as Jonas had warned. He spoke to no one unnecessarily. He stayed in the workshop or the quarters, nowhere else. On the 4th day, Evelyn came to the kitchen yard. She often visited there, bringing supplies or checking on meals for the household. No one thought twice about it. But this time, as she spoke with old Sarah about the evening's bread, she set down a basket near the workshop door. Just for a moment, just long enough. Micah saw it from where he was planing a piece of oak. His hands didn't stop moving, but his eyes followed her as she left the basket, spoke a few more words, then walked back toward the house. He waited, counted to 100. Then he stood, stretched as if his back ached, and walked over to check his tool basket. There, tucked between his saw and his measuring stick, was another note. He palmed it quick, slipping it into his pocket without breaking stride. Then he went back to work, forcing himself to breathe normally. That night, by candlelight, he read her words. Micah, your letter meant more to me than you might understand. I have lived in this house all my life, surrounded by people who speak but never truly say anything. You wrote 3 sentences about your mother's teaching, and I learned more about what matters than I've learned in years of empty conversation. I know you are right about the danger. I know we should not be writing, but I find I cannot stop. Perhaps that makes me selfish. Perhaps it makes me foolish. But when I read your words, I feel less alone in a house full of people. Tell me something true. Tell me about the things that matter to you. Tell me about what you dream of when you let yourself dream. I will understand if you cannot answer, but I hope you will. Micah read it 4 times before he finally folded it and added it to the growing collection in his wall. Tell me something true. He stared at the candle flame, watching it dance and flicker. What could he tell her that was true? That he dreamed of freedom. That felt too dangerous to write. That he missed his mother every single day. That felt too raw. But she'd asked, and somehow, he found he wanted to answer. He pulled out another scrap of paper and began to write. Miss Evelyn, something true. I dream in wood. When I sleep, I see the things I want to build. Tables that will hold family meals. Cradles that will rock babies safe. Doors that will keep out the cold and let in the morning light. I see these things clear as day, but I will never build them for myself. That is the truth I carry. My mother used to tell me stories about her grandmother, who was born free. She said there was a time when our family walked where they wanted, worked where they chose, kept what they made. I try to imagine that, but it's like trying to imagine flying. I know it exists, but I cannot picture it for myself. You asked what matters to me. People matter. The young ones who need protecting. The old ones who need remembering. The moments when someone does a kindness for no reason except that it's right. Those moments are rare, but they're real. They're what I hold on to when everything else feels heavy. Thank you for asking. Thank you for seeing me as someone worth asking. Micah, he folded the note and hid it in his shirt. Tomorrow, he'd find a way to leave it where she could find it. Tomorrow, he'd take another risk. Because for the first time in his life, someone wanted to know what he dreamed, and that was worth almost anything. Marcus Webb carefully refolded the first letters and laid them back in the box. The afternoon had grown late, shadows lengthening across the cabin floor. Tommy sat silent beside him, his eyes bright. There's more, Marcus said quietly, looking at the stack of papers still waiting to be read. A whole lot more. He pulled out the next letter, and the next, and began to understand that what they'd found wasn't just correspondence. It was a love story. It was a testimony. It was proof that even in the darkest places, the human spirit found ways to shine. We need to preserve these, Tommy said. Get them to a museum or a historical society. We will, Marcus agreed. But first, he lifted another letter. First, I reckon we need to hear their whole story. They kept these letters hidden for more than 150 years. Someone should finally listen. He unfolded the next page, and the cabin grew quiet, except for the sound of his voice reading words, written by candlelight in 1841, by a man who had every reason to despair, but chose hope instead. The story was just beginning. September 1841, Miss Evelyn. I read your last letter 5 times. You asked about my mother. I will tell you, though the words hurt to write. Her name was Sarah, as I said before. She had hands that were always gentle, even when they were worn raw. She sang hymns while she worked old songs her own mother taught her, songs about crossing rivers and finding rest. I did not understand them when I was young. Now I think maybe she was singing about a freedom none of us would see on this side of heaven. She died when I was 19. Fever took her in 3 days. I held her hand at the end, and she told me to remember that I was more than what they said I was, more than property, more than a tool. She said God made me complete, and no man's paper could change that truth. I hold to those words. Some days they are all I have. You asked if I am angry. The honest answer is yes. But anger is a luxury I cannot afford. So I turn it into something else. I turn it into precision, into care, into making things that will outlast me. That is my rebellion, to create beauty they cannot take away. I hope this is not too much truth. But you asked for it, and I find I cannot lie to you. Micah Evelyn sat in her room, the letter trembling in her hands. Afternoon light slanted through the window, falling across the page like a blessing. She'd read Micah's words 3 times already, and each time they cut deeper. I turned it into precision. She thought about the door he'd fixed, the shelves he'd built, the way every joint fit perfectly. She'd thought it was simply skill. Now she understood it was survival. It was dignity. It was a man refusing to be broken by a world designed to break him. She pulled out her writing paper, good paper, cream-colored and smoothened, dipped her pen in ink. Micah, it is not too much truth. It is exactly enough. I have been thinking about what you said, about turning anger into creation. I wonder if that is what I am doing with these letters. I am angry too, though I know I have no right to be. I live in comfort built on suffering. I eat food harvested by hands that will never be compensated. I wear dresses sewn by women who will never own one themselves. My father says this is simply how the world works. That some are meant to lead and others to follow. That it has always been this way and always will be. But when I read your words, when I see your work, I know he is wrong. You are not following, you are enduring. There is a difference. I wish I could change things. I wish I had power beyond these letters, but I do not. All I can offer is this. I see you, not as property, not as a tool, as a man who dreams in wood and carries his mother's wisdom, like a lantern in the dark. That has to mean something. Even if it changes nothing, it has to mean something. The letters continued through September and into October. They grew longer, more honest, more dangerous. Micah wrote about the other enslaved people on the plantation, young Elijah, who'd been sold away from his mother at age 8 and still cried in his sleep sometimes. Old Isaac, who remembered a time before the plantation and spoke of it like a dream. Ruth, who sang while she worked the kitchen and made the little ones laugh, even on the hardest days. Evelyn wrote about the loneliness of her life, about her mother's death, about the way her father had changed afterward, becoming harder, more distant, more obsessed with debts and profits. She wrote about her younger sister in Charleston, about books she read in secret, about a traveling preacher who sometimes stopped at the plantation and spoke of abolition in careful coded words. They never spoke face to face. That would be too dangerous. But through their letters, they built something neither of them had expected, a friendship, maybe more than friendship, though neither dared name it. And Jonas watched. It was early November when things began to unravel. Micah was working in the yard, repairing a broken wagon wheel, when he felt eyes on his back. He turned slowly and saw Jonas leaning against the barn wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You spend a lot of time reading," Jonas said. Micah's blood went cold. "Sir, don't play dumb. I've seen you with papers, notes, letters." Jonas pushed off the wall and walked closer. "Who's writing to you, Micah?" "Nobody, sir. Just instructions sometimes, for the work." "Instructions?" Jonas smiled that empty smile. "Funny. Instructions don't usually make a man smile the way you were smiling yesterday. Instructions don't usually get tucked careful in a pocket like they're precious." Micah kept his face still. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't." Jonas circled him slowly, like a dog circling wounded prey. "But I'll figure it out. I always do. And when I do, ... Double quotes. He left the sentence hanging, heavy with threat. He walked away, leaving Micah standing in the yard with his heart pounding so loud he thought everyone could hear it. That night, Micah wrote a letter he didn't want to write. "Miss Evelyn, we must stop. Jonas is suspicious. He has been watching me, asking questions. I do not know what he knows or suspects, but I know he is dangerous. If he finds our letters, if he proves what we have been doing, the consequences will be severe. For me, certainly, but for you as well. Your reputation, your safety, these matter. I will not be the cause of your harm. Please understand. This is not what I want, but it is what must be. Thank you for these months. Thank you for seeing me. I will carry that with me always." Micah Evelyn read the letter in her room, tears blurring the words. She knew he was right. She knew continuing was foolish. reckless, potentially ruinous. She wrote back anyway. Micah, no, I will not stop. I will not pretend these months meant nothing. I will not go back to living in a house full of people who see each other as furniture. Yes, Jonas is dangerous. Yes, we must be more careful. But careful is not the same as finished. My father is planning something. I overheard him talking with the overseer last week. They mentioned selling someone after the harvest. They mentioned needing to settle accounts. I could not hear everything, but I heard your name. We do not have time to stop. We have time only to decide what comes next. Trust me, please. Micah read her letter by candlelight, his hands shaking. They were planning to sell him after the harvest, which meant he had maybe a month, maybe less. He thought about running, but running alone meant almost certain death. The swamps were treacherous. The patrollers were ruthless. And even if he made it north, what then? He had no papers, no money, no connection. But staying meant being sold away from everything he knew, away from the people he protected, away from Evelyn. He pressed his palms against his eyes and tried to think. When he finally slept, he dreamed of doors. Hundreds of them, all locked, all leading nowhere. The next morning, Evelyn went to her father's study while he was at breakfast. Her heart hammered as she opened the ledger on his desk, the one he kept for plantation accounts. There, in his careful script, she found the entry. Micah Carpenter, age 32, consider transfer to Davidson, after cotton shipment, skilled hands, should fetch $1,200. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she closed the ledger, smoothed her skirts, and went to find the traveling preacher who'd been staying in the guest cottage. Reverend Samuel Clark was an older man with kind eyes and hands, marked by years of hard work. He traveled the region, preaching at plantations and holding services for slaves. But Evelyn had heard whispers that he was also involved with something else, something that helped people disappear north. She found him in the garden, reading his Bible beneath an oak tree. Reverend Clark, she said softly, may I speak with you in private? He looked up, his gaze sharp despite his gentle manner. Of course, Miss Harrow. They walked to the far edge of the garden, where the rose bushes grew thick enough to hide them from the house. I need help, Evelyn said without preamble. I need to help someone escape. I need to know if the rumors about you are true. The Reverend was quiet for a long moment. Then, what rumors might those be? That you know people who can help enslaved folks reach free states. That you've done it before. Miss Harrow, he said carefully, such accusations could be very dangerous for everyone involved. I know. I'm not accusing. I'm asking. Please. Her voice broke. They're going to sell him. After the harvest. I can't let that happen. Reverend Clark studied her face. Who is him? Micah, the carpenter. He's important to me. And he's in danger. I see. The Reverend folded his hands. And what makes you think I can help? Because I've watched you. I've seen how you talk to the folks in the quarters. I've seen the way they look at you like you're safe. Like you're hope. Evelyn stepped closer. Please, if you know a way, if there's any chance there may be, he said quietly. But it would require careful planning, resources, and courage from everyone involved. He paused. Including you, Miss Harrow. Are you prepared for what that might mean? Evelyn thought about her comfortable life, her warm bed, her full meals. She thought about never seeing her sister again, about her father's rage, about becoming an outcast from the only world she'd ever known. Then she thought about Micah's letters, about his mother's wisdom and his dreams in wood, about a man who turned anger into precision because it was the only rebellion he could afford. Yes, she said, I'm prepared. That evening, Evelyn wrote the longest letter she'd ever written to Micah. She explained what she'd discovered, what she'd arranged, and what she believed was possible. She outlined a plan that involved the Reverend, a riverboat captain, who sympathized with the abolition cause, and blank travel papers she'd stolen from her father's desk. She ended with words that terrified her to write, but felt truer than anything she'd ever said. I know this is madness. I know we barely know each other beyond ink and paper. But I also know that some things matter more than safety. Some things matter more than the life I was born into. You matter more. If you will trust me, if you will take this chance, I will do everything in my power to help you reach freedom. Not because I pity you, not because I want to ease my conscience, but because you deserve to dream in wood and build those dreams with your own hands. You deserve to be free. And maybe I deserve that too. Will you trust me? Evelyn Micah read her letter in the small hours of the morning, when the world was dark and silent. He read it until he had every word memorized. Then he sat for a long time, holding the paper, feeling its weight. She was offering him freedom. Real freedom, not just dreams, but freedom that would require leaving everyone behind. Elijah, old Isaac, Ruth, all the people who depended on him. who looked to him for strength. Could he do that? Could he save himself and abandon them? But if he stayed, he'd be sold. And then he'd be of no help to anyone. He thought about his mother's last words. You are more than what they say you are. Maybe it was time to prove that true. He pulled out a scrap of paper and wrote 4 words. I trust you. The next morning, Micah found a way to slip his response into Evelyn's sketch basket. She discovered it an hour later and pressed the note against her heart, eyes closed, breathing a prayer of gratitude. Then she went to work. She gathered supplies: dried meat, hard biscuits, a canteen. She memorized the layout of the swamps from maps in her father's library. She spoke again with Reverend Clark, who gave her the name of a riverboat captain and drew a careful map showing the safest route to the river landing. She prepared for an escape she knew might fail, might get them all killed or worse. But doing nothing was no longer an option. 3 days later, as dusk settled over the plantation, Evelyn left a note for Micah, telling him to meet her at the old cypress grove after dark. It was risky, the most dangerous thing they'd done yet, but they needed to talk face to face, needed to finalize the plan. Micah found the note tucked in his tool basket. His stomach churned with fear and anticipation as he read it. Meeting her could mean disaster, but it could also mean freedom. That night, after the other men fell asleep, he slipped out of the cabin and made his way through the dark toward the grove. The cypress trees loomed like sentinels, their knees jutting from shallow water. Spanish moss hung in ghostly curtains. Somewhere nearby, a night bird called Evelyn was already there, wrapped in a dark cloak, her face pale in the moonlight. They stared at each other for a long moment. This was the first time they'd been alone together. The first time they'd truly met beyond glimpses and stolen glances. You came, she whispered. You asked me to. She smiled, brief and nervous. I wasn't sure you would. They kept their distance, still careful, still aware of boundaries that weren't theirs to cross. But their eyes said what their bodies couldn't. Reverend Clark can help, Evelyn said quietly, but we have to move soon, before the harvest ends, before my father completes the sale. When Micah asked, 3 nights from now, there's a riverboat stopping at the landing. The captain knows to expect us. But Micah, ... She stepped closer. There's Elijah to think about. If we bring him, the danger increases. But if we leave him, we bring him, Micah said firmly. I won't leave him behind. He's too young to be alone here. Evelyn nodded. Then we bring him. But you need to tell him carefully. We can't risk anyone else knowing. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. They both froze. Someone's here, Micah breathed. Go, Evelyn whispered urgently. Different directions. Now. Micah melted into the shadows between the trees, moving silent as smoke. Evelyn walked boldly toward the sound, her heart pounding. Jonas stepped into view, his face half hidden by darkness. Evening, Miss Evelyn, he said. Awful late for a walk. I couldn't sleep, she said, keeping her voice steady. Too warm in the house. That's so. He looked past her, into the grove. Thought I heard voices. You heard me. I was praying. Is that forbidden? Jonas smiled that cold smile. Course not. Just seems a strange place for prayer. All these snakes and such. The grove is quiet, peaceful. She met his gaze. Was there something you needed, Jonas? He studied her for a long moment. Then, just making sure you're safe, Miss Evelyn. These are dangerous times. Never know what might be lurking in the dark. How thoughtful. But as you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Good night, Jonas. She walked past him, back toward the house, forcing herself not to run, not to look back. Behind her, Jonas stood in the grove, listening to the night sounds, his eyes searching the shadows. He didn't find Micah, but he knew something was happening, and he would be watching. Micah made it back to the quarters without being seen, his heart still racing. He'd heard every word between Evelyn and Jonas, heard the danger in Jonas's voice, the way he'd been searching for someone else. They couldn't meet again. It was too risky. But in 3 nights, they'd either be free or dead. He lay on his pallet, staring into darkness, and tried to prepare for both possibilities. The next day, Micah found a moment alone with Elijah while they worked in the barn. The boy was 15, all long limbs and quiet eyes, with hands already scarred from fieldwork. Elijah, Micah said softly, I need to talk to you about something important, but you can't tell anyone, not even Ruth. Can you do that? Elijah's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. We're brothers, remember? Micah glanced around, making sure they were alone. In 2 nights, I'm leaving, going north. Miss Evelyn's helping, and I want you to come with me. The boy's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, fear, hope, doubt. Leaving how? Can't tell you everything yet. Too dangerous. But I need to know, will you come? It's risky. We might not make it. But if we do, Double quotes. Freedom. Elijah breathed. Freedom, Micah confirmed. The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then, what about the others? Ruth and old Isaac and I know. But I can't save everyone. Not yet. Maybe someday, if we make it, we can come back and help. But right now, I can only take you. Micah gripped his shoulder. So I'm asking, will you come? Elijah's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I'll come. Good. 2 nights from now, stay awake after everyone sleeps. I'll come get you. Be ready. The next 48 hours crawled by like years. Micah worked mechanically, his mind spinning through all the things that could go wrong. Jonas watched him constantly now, making no secret of his suspicion. The overseer asked pointed questions about why Micah had been near the grove. Evelyn stayed away from the workshop entirely, avoiding any appearance of connection. But each night, Micah checked the hiding place where they left letters, and each night he found a brief note from Evelyn, with updates on the plan. Captain Hayes will be there. 2 hours after midnight. Reverend Clark is praying for us. I have the papers. I have the food. I have everything we need. And finally, on the evening before the escape, tomorrow night, we change everything. Be brave. I am with you. The next day passed in a blur of tension. Micah forced himself to work normally, to eat normally, to speak normally, but his hands shook every time he touched his tools. That evening, after supper, he stood in his cabin and looked around at the only home he'd known. The crude walls, the dirt floor, the narrow pallet. He was leaving. If everything went right, he'd never see this place again. He should have felt joy. Instead, he felt grief. For his mother, buried in the plantation cemetery. For the people he was leaving behind. For the boy he'd been, who'd believed this was all life would ever offer. He pulled out the collection of letters hidden in his wall. Every word Evelyn had written to him. Every response he'd written back. Their whole friendship. Their whole conspiracy. Documented in fading ink. He couldn't take them. Too risky. If they were caught, the letters would be evidence of Evelyn's involvement. But he couldn't destroy them either. They mattered too much. Finally, he folded them carefully, wrapped them in oilcloth, and slipped them into a small wooden box he'd made months ago, back before any of this started. Back when he was just a carpenter making things that would last. He'd hide them beneath the floorboards. If they escaped, the letters would remain, a testimony to what they'd dared. If they failed, maybe someday someone would find them, and know that 2 people had tried. That had to be enough. 2 hours after midnight, when the quarter was dark and silent, Micah rose from his pallet. He'd slept in his clothes. His heart hammered so loud, he was sure it would wake everyone. He crept to Elijah's cabin, and tapped gently on the door. The boy appeared instantly, already dressed, eyes wide with fear and excitement. Ready? Micah whispered. Ready? They slipped into the night, moving like shadows toward the agreed meeting place, the old well behind the storage barn, where Evelyn would be waiting. She was there, dressed in dark traveling clothes, a satchel over her shoulder. Reverend Clark stood beside her, his face grave in the moonlight. Everything's arranged, the Reverend said softly. The captain will be waiting at the landing, but you must hurry. Dawn comes early, and you need to be far away by then. Micah nodded. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, and saw the determination in her eyes. She was risking everything. For him. For a dream of a different world. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. She handed him the satchel. Papers, food, and water. Guard them with your life. I will. They turned toward the path that would lead them through the swamps to the river. Reverend Clark raised his hand in blessing. Go with God, he whispered. And they went. They made it almost to the marsh edge before they heard the sound. Dogs. Not the regular plantation dogs. Hunting dogs. And they were getting closer. They know. Evelyn breathed. Someone saw us. Someone told Micah's mind raced. They couldn't outrun dogs. Not through the swamp. Not with Elijah slowing them down. You have to go back, Micah said urgently to Evelyn. Say you heard noises and came to investigate. Say you saw nothing. They'll believe you. No, they'll kill me. But you, they might spare. Go now, please. The dogs sounded closer. Voices shouted in the distance. Evelyn grabbed his hand, squeezed once, hard. I'm not giving up. There's still time. We'll find another way. How? They're coming, trust me, she said. The same words he'd written to her. One more time. Trust me. Then she turned and ran straight toward the pursuing voices, shouting at the top of her lungs. Here, over here. I heard something by the old well. Micah watched in horror as she deliberately led the hunters away from their path, deliberately drew attention to herself. Come on, he said to Elijah, grabbing the boy's arm. While they're distracted, move. They plunged into the marsh, mud sucking at their feet, branches scratching their faces. Behind them, Confused shouts erupted as the hunting party found Evelyn instead of escaped slaves. Micah didn't know if her plan would work, didn't know if she'd be punished or believed, didn't know if they'd circle back and find him anyway. But he ran. For his mother, for Elijah, for Evelyn, who'd just saved them by sacrificing herself. He ran toward the river, toward the boat, toward a freedom he still couldn't quite believe in. And behind him, in the darkness, Evelyn faced the overseer and the dogs and her furious father, and began weaving the most important lie of her life. Evelyn faced the circle of lanterns, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. Her father stood at the center, his face twisted with rage. The overseer, Mr. Garrett, held 2 straining hounds on thick leather leashes, and Jonas watched her with eyes that knew too much. "What are you doing out here?" Her father's voice could have cut stone. Evelyn kept her chin high. "I heard noises. Dogs barking. I came to see what was happening. At 2 in the morning, dressed for travel." Her father gestured at her dark clothes, the practical boots she'd worn instead of slippers. "I heard shouting. I dressed quickly and came to help." "Help with what, exactly?" Jonas stepped forward, that cold smile on his face. "What did you think was happening, Miss Evelyn?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I thought perhaps someone was stealing, or maybe an animal got into the stores. How was I to know you were hunting men like they were rabbits?" Her father's jaw clenched. "You will go back to the house now, and you will stay in your room until I decide what to do with you, father, now." 2 house slaves were called to escort her back. As they led her away, she glanced once over her shoulder toward the marsh. It was too dark to see anything. No movement, no sound. "Please," she prayed silently, "please let them make it." In the marsh, Micah and Elijah pushed through waist-deep water, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The mud tried to hold them with every step. Branches scratched their faces and arms. Something slithered past Micah's leg, snake or alligator. He couldn't tell, but he kept moving. "I can't." Elijah stumbled, almost went under. Micah grabbed his arm, hauling him upright. "Yes, you can. We're almost through. Keep moving." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded. Whether that meant the hunters had given up, or simply taken a different route, Micah couldn't know. He could only push forward, following the mental map Reverend Clark had drawn. Through the cypress grove, past the dead oak with the lightning scar. Follow the high ground until you reach the inlet. The boat will be waiting at the old dock. His legs burned, his lungs ached, but he kept moving. They emerged from the marsh an hour later, soaked and shaking, covered in mud and scratches. The river spread before them, wide and dark, reflecting the moon like scattered silver coins. "There," Elijah whispered, pointing. A small boat sat tied to the remains of a dock, half-rotted, but still standing. A figure stood beside its hull, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his life on the water. "Captain Hayes." Micah and Elijah hurried toward him, trying not to run, trying not to look like escaping slaves, even though that's exactly what they were. "You the ones Clark sent?" the captain asked quietly. "Yes, sir." "Where's the woman?" He said there'd be 3. Mika's throat tightened. She had to stay behind, had to distract the hunters. "It's just us now." Captain Hayes studied them for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the boat. "Get in, under the top in the bow. Don't make a sound. Don't move. Don't hardly breathe. We've got a long way to go, and River Patrol's been extra vigilant lately." They climbed into the boat, and Hayes covered them with a stained tarp that smelled of fish and oil. The darkness beneath was complete. Micah felt Elijah trembling beside him, and put a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. The boat pushed away from the dock with a gentle scrape. Water lapped against the hull. Above them, Captain Hayes moved quietly, adjusting the small sail, settling into the rhythm of river travel. They were moving, away from the plantation, away from chains and overseers, and a life of belonging to someone else. But also, away from Evelyn. Micah closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for her safety, for her forgiveness, for the courage she'd shown. Then he lay still and silent, listening to the river carry them north. At the plantation, dawn broke over chaos. The overseer had organized a thorough search of the quarters. 2 men were missing, Micah and young Elijah. Every cabin was torn apart. Every enslaved person was questioned roughly, threatened, promised leniency for information. No one said anything. Even those who might have seen something kept silent, bound by a code stronger than fear. "You don't help the hunters, ever." Evelyn remained locked in her room, listening to the shouts and commotion below. A house slave brought her breakfast, cold biscuits and water, and whispered quickly before leaving. They didn't find them. Micah and Elijah both gone. Relief flooded through her, so powerful she had to sit down. They'd made it, at least to the boat, at least that far. But her own situation was dire. Her father knew she'd been involved somehow. Jonas had probably already poisoned his mind with suspicions. She'd be watched constantly from now on. Maybe sent away to live with relative, maybe worse. It didn't matter. Micah was free, or on his way to freedom. That was enough. It had to be enough. The boat traveled slowly up the river, staying close to the banks, moving mostly at night. Captain Hayes proved to be a man of few words, but steady competence. He gave them water, hard bread, dried fish. He warned them when patrols approached and covered them with nets and cargo. 3 days into the journey, as they passed through a narrow channel between two islands, Hayes spoke quietly. "We got trouble ahead. There's a checkpoint at the next town. They've been stopping every boat, checking cargo and papers." Mika's stomach dropped. "Can we go around?" "Not without adding 2 days. And I got a schedule to keep. If I'm late, folks will ask questions." Hayes adjusted the sail. "But I got an idea. There's a man I know runs a mill about 5 miles up. He's sympathetic to the cause. I can drop you there, let you travel overland for a bit, while I get past the checkpoint. Then I'll pick you up again on the other side." "Can we trust him?" Micah asked. "Much as you can trust anyone these days. But it's either that, or risk the checkpoint. Your choice." Micah looked at Elijah, who was exhausted, hungry, scared, but trying to be brave. The boy had barely spoken since they left, just held on to Micah like he was the only solid thing in a world turned liquid. "We'll go with your friend," Micah decided. "Overland is better than a patrol boat." The miller's name was Samuel Briggs. He was a short man with powerful arms and kind eyes, and when Captain Hayes explained the situation, he nodded immediately. "I'll hide them in the grain storage until nightfall," Briggs said. "Then my son will guide them north to the meeting spot. Should take about 8 hours on foot, maybe 10 if the weather turns." Hayes clasped Micah's shoulder. "You stay safe, stay smart. I'll be waiting at the old ferry crossing, 2 days from now at sunset. If you're not there, I'll wait 1 extra night. After that, I have to move on." "We'll be there," Micah promised. They spent the day hidden in Briggs's grain shed, surrounded by sacks of corn and wheat. The miller brought them real food stew, with actual meat, bread that was fresh and soft, apples that tasted like heaven. "First decent meal you've had in a while, I reckon," Briggs said, watching them eat. "Yes, sir." Micah managed around a mouthful of bread. "Don't call me sir, name's Samuel, and you're guests in my home, not property to be ordered around." He sat down across from them. "Where you headed?" "All the way to Canada. Pennsylvania, I hope. Heard there's free black communities there. Places where we could work, build lives. There are good communities too. Strong folks who look out for each other." Samuel leaned forward. "But you need to understand something. Even in free states, you're not really safe. Not yet. Slave catchers operate everywhere. They got legal backing from the fugitive slave law. So you stay careful. You trust slowly. You keep moving until you find a place that feels solid beneath your feet." "How do we know when we've found that?" Elijah asked quietly. Samuel smiled. "You'll know. You'll wake up one morning and realize you're not afraid anymore. That's how you know you're home." That night, Samuel's sooner, young man named Daniel, led them north through forest and field. He carried a rifle and knew every path, every shortcut, every place where creeks could be forded and hills could be climbed. They walked in silence, saving their breath for the journey. The night was cool, stars bright overhead. Once, they heard dogs in the distance and froze, but the sound faded away toward the east. False alarm, or someone else being hunted. By dawn, they'd covered nearly 12 miles. Daniel led them to a small cave, hidden behind a waterfall, where they could rest during daylight hours. "I'll come back tonight," he said. "Bring more food and water. We'll cover the rest of the distance after dark. Should reach the ferry crossing with time to spare." After he left, Micah and Elijah collapsed onto the stone floor. Exhausted, the sound of falling water filled the cave, peaceful and constant. "You think Miss Evelyn is all right?" Elijah asked. Micah stared at the cave ceiling. "I hope so. I pray so." "You love her?" It wasn't a question. Micah looked at the boy, surprised. "I seen the way you looked when you talked about her," Elijah continued. "The way you kept her letters so careful, like they was made of glass." Micah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah, I reckon I do. That's why she helped us. Because she loves you too. Maybe." Micah closed his eyes. "Or maybe she just believed no one should be owned. Either way, she sacrificed everything to give us this chance. We can't waste it. We won't," Elijah promised. "We're gonna make it all the way. We're gonna be free." Back at the plantation, Evelyn remained confined to her room for 5 days. Her father came to see her only once, his face granate. "You helped them escape," he said. "Not a question, a statement." "I did not. Don't lie to me, Evelyn. Jonas saw you. Others saw you. You were involved." Jonas is a bitter man who sees conspiracy everywhere, and I was involved in nothing except investigating a disturbance on our property. Her father stared at her for a long time. Then, you're to be sent to your aunt's house in Charleston. I'm arranging it now. You'll leave at the end of the week. Father, you have shamed this family. You have cost me valuable property, and you have endangered your own safety by consorting with... Double quotes. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Charleston will give you distance. Time to reconsider your foolish notions. My notions aren't foolish, and I won't reconsider them. He raised his hand for a moment. She thought he might strike her, but then lowered it slowly. Pack your things. You leave Friday. He walked out without another word. Evelyn sat on her bed, trembling with anger and grief and relief all mixed together. Charleston meant exile. It meant losing her home, such as it was. It meant surveillance and restriction, and a life designed to break her spirit. But it also meant Micah had escaped. Her father wouldn't be sending her away if there was still a chance to recapture him. He was gone. He was free. That was worth everything. On the second night of travel, Micah and Elijah reached the ferry crossing just as the sun touched the western horizon. Captain Hayes was there, his boat tied to a rotting pier, scanning the tree line. When he saw them emerge from the woods, his weathered face broke into a rare smile. Thought you might not make it, he called quietly. We had good help, Micah said, clasping Daniel's hand one last time. Thank you for everything. Go with God, Daniel said. And when you're settled, send word if you can. Let us know you made it. I will. They boarded the boat again, and Hayes pushed off immediately, catching the current. The river widened here, flowing north and east, away from everything Micah had ever known. For the first time since they'd started running, he let himself believe they might actually make it. They traveled for 8 more days, stopping at safe houses and mills, hiding in root cellars and attics, always moving north. Captain Hayes introduced them to a network of helpers conductors on what they called the Underground Railroad. Though there were no actual trains, just brave people risking everything to help strangers reach freedom. In a town whose name Micah never learned, a Quaker woman gave them proper clothes, worn but clean, with no slave tags or marks. A German blacksmith removed the scars on Elijah's wrist, where shackles had once rubbed raw, treating them with salve and bandages. An elderly black woman, who'd bought her own freedom 20 years earlier, fed them chicken and dumplings, and told them stories of others who'd made the journey. You're almost there, she said. Pennsylvania's just a few days north. You'll feel it when you cross the line. Can't explain how, but you'll feel it. The air tastes different in a free state. Micah wanted to believe her, but he'd learned not to trust hope too much. Hope could break you worse than chains if you weren't careful. Still, each day took them farther from the plantation, farther from the overseer's whip, and Jonas's cold eyes, and the knowledge that his body belonged to someone else. Each day was one day closer to proving his mother right, that he was more than property, that no man's paper could change what God had made him. On the 11th day, they crossed into Pennsylvania. Captain Hayes had left them 3 days earlier at the Maryland border, his boat unable to travel farther north. He'd clasped Micah's hand and said, "You're a brave man. Don't forget that, and don't forget those of us who helped. Someday, when you're safe, find a way to help others. That's how this works. That's how we win." From Maryland, they'd traveled on foot with a Quaker couple who operated a farm near the border. And now, standing on a ridge overlooking rolling hills and distant mountains, the couple pointed north. "Pennsylvania," the wife said. "Free soil. You're safe now. Legally safe, at least." Micah stared at the land stretching before him. It looked the same as every other land he'd seen, trees and fields, rivers and roads. But the woman was right. The air did taste different, or maybe that was just freedom, finally settling into his lungs. Beside him, Elijah began to cry. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that had been locked up so long it hurt to let it out. Micah put his arm around the boy's shoulders and let him cry. Let himself cry too. Just a little. They'd made it. Against every odd, every danger, every reason to fail, they'd made it. The Quaker couple directed them to a small town called Meadowbrook, where a free black community had taken root. Freedmen and escaped slaves lived side by side, farming and working trades, building lives that belonged to them. When Micah and Elijah walked into town dusty, exhausted, still hardly believing they were here, they were met with cautious welcome. These folks knew what it meant to run. They recognized the look in Micah's eyes, the way Elijah jumped at sudden sounds. A carpenter named Joseph Freeman offered Micah work immediately. "Always need skilled hands," he said. "Can you handle finished carpentry, cabinets and such?" "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Don't call me sir. We're all equals here. Call me Joseph." He smiled. "Come on, I'll show you the workshop." and we'll find you and the boy a place to stay. Nothing fancy, but it's yours. No master, no overseer, just yours." That night, Micah and Elijah slept in a small cabin at the edge of town. It had real beds with mattresses, a wood stove for cooking, windows with glass. It was 10 times better than the quarters they'd left behind. Micah lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to come and drag him back, waiting for the dream to end. But no one came. The only sounds were crickets and wind and Elijah's quiet breathing. They were free. They were really, truly free. The weeks passed into months. Micah threw himself into work, building cabinets and tables and bed frames for the growing community. His hands remembered every skill, every technique. But now he was building for himself, building a life, not just serving someone else's. Elijah was taken in by a family with 3 younger children. He learned to read at the community school, his quick mind soaking up knowledge like rain after drought. He still had nightmares sometimes, still woke crying for his mother. But slowly, he began to smile, to laugh, to believe in tomorrow. And Micah thought about Evelyn every single day. He wondered where she was, if her father had punished her, if she regretted what she'd done. He wanted to write to her but didn't dare. A letter could be intercepted, used as evidence. It could bring slave catchers down on Meadowbrook. He couldn't risk it, but he thought about her. Every sunrise, every night before sleep, he remembered her letters, her courage, her willingness to sacrifice everything. He remembered the way she'd looked at his work and seen him, not just his skills. He remembered her last words before the dogs came. Trust me, he had, and she'd saved him. Spring arrived in Pennsylvania, bringing warmth and wildflowers, and the smell of earth waking up. Micah stood in Joseph's workshop one morning, planing a piece of cherry wood, when a thought struck him with sudden clarity. Evelyn had hidden their letters. He was certain of it. She wouldn't have destroyed them, they meant too much, and she wouldn't have kept them where her father might find them, which meant they were probably still at the plantation, hidden somewhere safe. The letters were proof of what they'd done, proof of courage and conspiracy and love that crossed every line society had drawn. Someday, maybe someone would find those letters, read them, understand what had happened in that place. The thought brought him strange comfort. Their story wouldn't be lost, even if they never saw each other again. Even if Evelyn married someone suitable and Micah built his life here in Pennsylvania, their story would remain hidden but whole. That had to be enough. But 2 weeks later, everything changed. Micah was working on a cabinet when Joseph came into the workshop, his face grave. "Someone here to see you," he said quietly. "Says it's important." Micah's stomach clenched. Slave catchers. But they couldn't operate openly here. Pennsylvania was a free state. Unless they had false warrants. Unless they'd bribed officials. "Who is it?" Micah asked. Joseph stepped aside, and Evelyn walked into the workshop. She was thinner than he remembered, dressed in plain traveling clothes, with her hair pulled back, simple. She looked exhausted and determined and scared all at once. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then she said, voice shaking, "I hope you don't mind. I came to see if you were all right, and ... She swallowed hard. "And to see if maybe there was room in your new life for someone who's running from a different kind of chains." Micah crossed the workshop in 3 strides. He stopped just before reaching her, still aware of boundaries, still careful. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Reverend Clark. He has connections. It took weeks of asking, but I finally got word." She looked at him with those eyes that had first seen him as more than property. "Your father sent me away. I was supposed to stay in Charleston with my aunt, but I couldn't. I couldn't go back to that life, pretending everything was fine, pretending I hadn't helped you escape, pretending I didn't." She stopped, unable to finish. "Didn't what?" Micah asked softly. "Didn't love you." The words came out in a rush. "I know it's impossible. I know society says we can't, that you and I are too different, but I don't care anymore. I don't care what they say. I just care what's true." Micah felt something break open in his chest. All the careful control he'd maintained for months, all the walls he'd built around hope, they crumbled. "I love you too," he said. "Been carrying those words since the night we ran. Since before that, maybe. Since the first letter." She smiled through tears. "So there's room for someone like me." He took her hands the first time he'd ever touched her skin against his. "There's room. There's always been room." The community welcomed Evelyn cautiously at first. Some folks worried she'd bring trouble. Some wondered if a white woman could really leave behind everything she'd known. But Evelyn proved herself through work and time. She found a position at the school, teaching the youngest children. She lived in a small room above the general store, earning her own keep for the first time in her life. She wrote to her sister in Charleston, the only family member she still trusted, explaining why she'd left. where she'd gone, and asking her not to reveal her location. And she and Micah, they built something new. Something that didn't have a name in either of their old worlds, but felt true nonetheless. They walked together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They sat in the workshop while he built furniture, and she sketched the finished pieces. They attended church together on Sundays, standing side by side while the congregation sang hymns about freedom and promised lands. In June, they were married by the town's minister in a simple ceremony under an oak tree. Elijah stood as witness, crying happy tears. Half the town attended, bringing food and gifts and blessings. Micah wore a suit he'd saved 3 months to buy. Evelyn wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. They spoke vows that were theirs alone, promising to build a life of equals, of partners, of two people who'd crossed impossible distances to find each other. When the minister pronounced them married, Micah kissed her gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. Because she was. Because they both were. The community celebrated until the stars came out. Music and dancing, and joy that was earned, not given. Freedom that was real, not promised. And later, walking back to the cabin Micah had built with his own hands, the first thing he'd ever built, that truly belonged to him, Evelyn squeezed his hand and said, "We made it. Against everything, we made it." "We did," Micah agreed. "But I reckon the journey's not over. We got a lifetime ahead now. A lifetime of figuring out what free really means." She smiled. "Then let's figure it out together." Summer 1842, the Pennsylvania sun rose warm over Meadowbrook, painting the workshop in shades of honey and amber. Micah stood at his bench, running his hand along a piece of walnut he was preparing for a rocking chair. The wood was smooth as silk under his palm, the grain flowing like water. Behind him, the door opened. Evelyn entered, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, steam rising in lazy spirals. "You've been out here since dawn," she said, setting one cup beside his tools. "Couldn't sleep. Had an idea for the chair arms. Wanted to try it while it was fresh in my mind." She leaned against the workbench, watching him with that look. He'd come to know, the one that said she was seeing not just what he was making, but why it mattered. "Show me." He picked up the sketch he'd drawn. "See here. Most rocking chairs got straight arms, but I'm thinking curved, following the natural bend of the wood. Makes it stronger and more comfortable, like you're working with the wood instead of against it." "Exactly," he smiled. "You understand. I had a good teacher." She sipped her coffee. "The Hendersons want to commission a dining table, big enough for 10. They're expecting their 4th child, and want room for the family to grow." Micah nodded slowly. A year ago, the idea of building something for a growing family would have hurt, would have reminded him of all the families torn apart on the plantation, including his own. But now it felt different. Now it felt like planting seeds in good soil. "Tell them yes. I'll need 2 weeks to do it right. They'll be pleased." Evelyn set down her cup. "I have school this morning, but tonight, Elijah wants to show us something. He's been working on a project. Any hints? He swore me to secrecy, but I think you'll be proud." After she left, Micah returned to his work. The shop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil smells. That meant home now. Through the window, he could see the town waking up. Smoke rising from chimneys, children heading to school, men and women walking to work they chose, earning wages they kept. Freedom still felt new some days, still felt like something he needed to hold carefully, like it might slip away if he wasn't vigilant. But it was real. He was real. Not property, not a tool. A man, whole and complete, just as his mother had said. That evening, Elijah came to the cabin, practically bouncing with excitement. He was 16 now, taller than Micah, with his mother's eyes and a smile that had finally learned to come easy. "Ready?" the boy asked. "Ready for what?" Micah replied. "You'll see. Come on." He led them through town to the schoolhouse. Inside, the main room had been rearranged. Chairs faced the front, where a small table held something covered with cloth. Several families from the community were already gathered. Joseph Freeman and his wife, the minister and his daughter, the Hendersons, who'd commissioned the table. Others, Micah recognized people, who'd welcomed him, taught him, showed him what freedom could look like. "What's all this?" Evelyn whispered. Elijah just grinned and walked to the front of the room. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. I wanted to thank everyone, for helping me and Micah, for giving us a home, for teaching me things I never thought I'd learn." He swallowed hard. "Back at the plantation, I couldn't read, couldn't write more than my name. But Mrs. Stevens at the school, she's been working with me, and I wanted to show you what I learned." He pulled the cloth away. Beneath it sat a wooden box carefully joined, sanded smooth, with simple but elegant lines. And on the lid, carved in careful letters, "Hope." "I made this," Elijah said. "Micah taught me the carpentry. Mrs. Stevens taught me the letters. And inside, he opened the box to reveal a stack of papers covered in writing. I wrote down our story. Everything I remember about running. About the people who helped us. About what it felt like to cross into Pennsylvania and realize I wasn't property anymore. His voice cracked. I wrote it down because I don't want to forget. And I don't want anyone else to forget either. Someday, maybe my children will read this. Maybe their children. And they'll know what it cost to get here. They'll know about the brave folks who helped strangers escape. About people like Miss Evelyn, who risked everything. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes shining with tears. So this is for all of us. Elijah finished. A reminder. And a promise that we'll keep helping others, the way we were helped. The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and wiping their eyes. Micah crossed to Elijah and pulled him into a fierce hug. Your mama would be so proud, he whispered. I'm so proud. Later, walking home under a sky full of stars, Evelyn slipped her hand into Micah's. That boy is going to do great things, she said. He already has. He survived. That's the greatest thing there is. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Evelyn said, I've been thinking about the letters, the ones we wrote, the ones I hid beneath the cabin floor. I think about them too. Do you think they're still there? Or do you think someone found them? Micah considered. I reckon they're still there. That cabin was falling apart even when I lived in it. Probably nobody's set foot inside since we left. Should we try to get them back, someday? Too dangerous. Your father's still alive. The overseer too. And Jonas. Micah shook his head. Going back would be foolish. I know. But I hate the thought of them just sitting there, forgotten. They're not forgotten. We remember. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Those letters changed everything. They brought us here. To this life. That matters more than the paper they're written on. You're right. She smiled. As usual. Don't let that get around. Ruins my reputation as a stubborn carpenter. She laughed. And the sound was like music. Autumn, 1843. The leaves turned gold and crimson, falling like blessing on the town. Micah's workshop thrived. He'd taken on an apprentice, a young man named Thomas, who'd been born free but wanted to learn a trade. Together, they built furniture that people came from neighboring towns to buy. Evelyn's school expanded. She now taught not just children but adults who wanted to learn reading and writing. The classes met 3 evenings a week, and the room was always full. Former slaves, hungry for the education they'd been denied, determined to claim every piece of freedom they could. On a cool October evening, Micah returned home to find Evelyn sitting by the fire, a letter in her hands. Her face was pale. What's wrong? He asked immediately. It's from my sister, from Charleston. She held up the letter. My father. He's dead. Heart attack. 2 weeks ago. Micah sank into the chair beside her. I'm sorry. I'm not sure I am. Her voice was barely a whisper. Does that make me terrible? That I feel more relief than grief. It makes you honest. He hurt you. He hurt a lot of people. My sister says the plantation is being sold. Everything. The land. The equipment. The double quotes. She couldn't say the word. The people. Micah's chest tightened. Old Isaac would be sold. Ruth. All the others he'd left behind. His mother's grave would belong to strangers. My sister says she's trying to help where she can. Evelyn continued. Trying to convince buyers to keep families together. But there's only so much she can do. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. Finally, Micah said, we can't save everyone. I learned that when we ran. It still hurts, but it's true. I know, but I wish. Double quotes. She leaned against him. I just wish the world was different. It will be. Maybe not in our lifetime. Maybe not in our children's lifetime. But it will be. People like Elijah, writing down their stories. People like us, building lives that prove freedom works. We're planting seeds. That matters. Spring 1844, a traveling preacher came through Meadowbrook in April. Not Reverend Clark. He'd been arrested in Maryland for helping slaves escape and was currently in prison awaiting trial. But another conductor on the railroad, a woman named Sister Margaret. She stayed 3 days, resting and gathering supplies, before continuing north with 2 runaways she was guiding to Canada. On her last evening, she joined Micah and Evelyn for supper. Reverend Clark sends his regards, Sister Margaret said. I visited him 2 months ago. He's in good spirits, considering, says to tell you he thinks of you often and prays your life proves worth the risks he took. Will he? Double quotes. Evelyn hesitated. Will he be all right? Hard to say. The trial keeps getting delayed. But he's got good lawyers. And public opinion is turning. Maybe not enough to free him, but enough to keep him alive. Sister Margaret broke off a piece of bread. He said to tell you something else. Said you'd understand what it means. What's that? Micah asked. He said, the letters are safe. The cabin stood empty all this time, but I checked before my arrest. They're still there, still hidden, waiting. Micah and Evelyn looked at each other, stunned. He went back. Evelyn whispered. Before he was arrested, yes. Said he had to know if your story survived. Sister Margaret smiled. He believes in preserving testimonies. Says every story matters. Every act of resistance counts. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn turned to Micah. Maybe we should go back, before the new owners take over. Get the letters. It's too dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous. Evelyn, listen. She propped herself up on one elbow. You said it yourself. We're planting seeds. Those letters are seeds too. They're proof that love can exist even in the darkest places. That people can choose right over easy. Don't you think that story deserves to be told? Yes, but not at the cost of our safety. Then let me go alone. I can say I'm retrieving personal effects. My father just died. It wouldn't seem strange for me to want something from the old place. Absolutely not. If you go, I go. Micah, I said. If you go, I go. We're partners now. Equals. Remember. You don't make those decisions alone anymore. She smiled to spite herself. Stubborn carpenter. Stubborn teacher. They lay quiet for a while. Then Micah said, if we're going to do this foolish thing, we need a plan. A good one. And we need help. Summer, 1844. Sister Margaret agreed to guide them as far as Maryland. From there, they'd be on their own. But at least they'd have safe houses and contacts along the way. Joseph Freeman thought they were crazy, but respected their decision. You need anything, money, supplies, prayers, you let me know. Elijah wanted to come too, but Micah refused. You've already risked enough. You've got a future here. Don't throw it away for old ghosts. Those aren't ghosts. Those are our stories. I know. But someone needs to stay here and keep those stories alive if we don't come back. That's you, Elijah. You're the memory keeper now. They left on a Tuesday morning in June, dressed in traveling clothes, carrying minimal supplies. To anyone watching, they were simply a couple visiting family in Maryland. Nothing suspicious. Nothing worth noting. The journey south felt strange, retracing steps Micah had taken in the opposite direction 3 years ago. Every landmark triggered memories. The river where Captain Hayes had picked them up. The mill where Samuel Briggs had hidden them. The forest where they'd walked all night, terrified and hopeful and free. Going back felt like swimming upstream, against nature, against sense. But the letters pulled them forward like a current they couldn't resist. They reached the old plantation on a humid evening in late June. The house was dark, half the windows broken. The fields were overgrown, cotton plants choked with weeds. No workers moved between the rows. No smoke rose from the quarters. The place looked abandoned, dead. Micah felt sick looking at it. This had been his whole world once. These fields had drunk his sweat and his mother's blood. This land held every sorrow he'd ever known. But it also held the letters, the proof, the story. They waited until full dark, then crept toward the slave quarters. The cabins stood like skeletons, roofs caved in, doors hanging crooked. Micah's old cabin was the third in the row. Inside, moonlight filtered through gaps in the walls. Dirt floor, broken chimney. The pallet where he'd slept was rotted to nothing, but the floor of the floor was still there. Micah knelt and ran his hands along the boards, searching for the spot. There, the two planks that didn't quite meet, the gap where he'd hidden Evelyn's first note. He pried up the boards carefully. They came loose with a dry crack. And there, wrapped in oilcloth, was the wooden box he'd made. His hands shook as he lifted it. The box was undamaged, the joints still tight. He opened it slowly. The letters were inside, every single one. My name is Micah. I am writing this because I must. You asked what matters to me. People matter. I love you too. Been carrying those words since the night we ran. All of it. Every word they'd written. Every risk they'd taken. Every moment of hope against darkness. Preserved. Waiting. Surviving. Evelyn knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. She lifted one of the letters, her own handwriting. Now faded, but still legible. We did it, she whispered. We really did it. Footsteps crunched outside. They froze. A figure appeared in the doorway, backlit by moonlight. For a heart-stopping moment, Micah thought it was Jonas. Thought they'd been caught. Thought everything was about to end. Then the figure spoke. Micah, that really you? He knew that voice. Ruth. She stepped inside, and he saw her, clearly older, grayer, but unmistakably Ruth from the kitchen. The woman who'd sung while she worked, and made children laugh on the hardest days. Lord have mercy, she breathed. I thought I was seeing ghosts. What are you doing here? Micah asked. Same as you. I reckon. Came back to say goodbye before the new owners take over. Came to ... She gestured vaguely. To remember. Are you free now? Did they free you when they sold the place? Ruth's laugh was bitter. No such luck. Got sold to a family over in Greene County, but they're old and soft-hearted. Let me visit my daughter's grave once a year. She looked at the box in Micah's hands. What you got there? Letters. Proof of what happened here. Proof that people fought back, even when it seemed impossible. Ruth nodded slowly. Good. Someone should remember. Someone should tell the truth about places like this. We will, Evelyn promised. We'll make sure the story doesn't die. They stayed only long enough to secure the box and say goodbye to Ruth. Then they fled north again, moving fast through the humid darkness, hearts pounding until they were miles away from the plantation. At a safe house in Maryland, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. Micah opened the box again and carefully sorted the letters, reading through them by candlelight. It's all here, he said wonderingly. Everything we wrote, everything we risked. Evelyn picked up one of the letters, the one where he'd described his dreams of building cradles and tables and doors. What should we do with them? Keep them safe. Add to them. Keep writing our story. He looked at her. And someday, when we're old and gray, we'll make sure these get to someone who'll preserve them proper. A library or historical society. Somewhere people can learn from them. A testimony, Evelyn said softly. A testimony, Micah agreed. To courage, to love, to the fact that even in the darkest places, light can survive. Pennsylvania, 1856 years passed, like water flowing downstream, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough, but always moving forward. Micah's workshop became the finest in 3 counties. He trained 5 apprentices, including 2 formerly enslaved men who'd found their way to Meadowbrook. The furniture he built was sought after, not just for its quality, but for what it represented. Beauty created by free hands. Evelyn's school graduated its first class of adult students, 12 men and women who could now read, write, and cipher. They held a ceremony in the town square, and every student read aloud from books they'd chosen themselves. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Elijah left for college in Ohio, one of the few institutions that accepted black students. Before he departed, he gave Micah and Evelyn a copy of his manuscript, the story of their escape, carefully written and bound in leather. Make sure this gets told, he said. Promise me. We promise, they said together. And on a cool autumn evening in 1850, Evelyn came home from school with news that made Micah's heart stop. I'm pregnant, she said simply. He stared at her. We single quotes going to be parents. Next spring. Micah sat down heavily. A child. His child. A free child who would never know the weight of chains. Never understand what it meant to be property. Never have to turn anger into precision just to survive. Are you happy? Evelyn asked nervously. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Their daughter was born in April 1851, during a rainstorm that washed the world clean. They named her Sarah, after Micah's mother. She had Evelyn's dark hair, and Micah's steady gaze. And from the moment she drew her first breath, she was loved more fiercely than either of them knew possible. Micah built her a cradle, one of the cradles he'd dreamed about years ago, back when dreams seemed impossible. He carved flowers along the rails and polished the wood until it glowed like honey in sunlight. The first night Sarah slept in that cradle, Micah sat beside her for hours, just watching her breathe. This tiny person, this miracle, this proof that the future could be different from the past. Evelyn found him there at dawn, still keeping vigil. Come to bed, she said softly. In a minute. I just ... double quotes. He touched Sarah's tiny hand. I just want to make sure she's real. She's real. We're all real. And we're free. Pennsylvania, 1870. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and read everything she could get her hands on. She attended the school where her mother taught, excelling in every subject. She learned carpentry from her father, developing the same careful touch with wood that he had. And she loved stories, especially the story of how her parents had met. Tell me again, she'd beg, about the letters and the escape and the riverboat. So they told her, again and again, and they showed her the box of letters, explaining that these papers represented something precious, proof that love could survive anything. When Sarah was 10, Micah and Evelyn made a decision. It's time, Micah said. They traveled back to the old plantation one last time. It had changed hands twice since Evelyn's father died. The current owners were running a smaller operation, and the old slave quarters had been torn down entirely to make room for a barn. But before demolition, Micah and Evelyn had retrieved the box of letters they'd hidden all those years ago, and now they returned with something new, their own additions to the collection. letters they'd written to each other over the years, records of Sarah's birth, copies of Elijah's manuscript, newspaper clippings about the school and the workshop and the growing free black community in Meadowbrook, all of it carefully preserved in the wooden box Micah had made. They buried it beneath the floor of the new barn deeper this time, wrapped in better protection. Someday, maybe decades or even centuries from now, someone would find it. Someone would read their story and understand what they'd fought for. "Why are we hiding it again?" Sarah asked. "Why not just keep it with us?" "Because stories are too important to trust to just one place," Evelyn explained. "This way, even if something happens to us, the story survives." "Will someone really find it?" "Maybe," Micah said. "Maybe not. But we have to have faith. Faith that truth matters. That stories matter. That people in the future will care about people in the past." They returned home to Pennsylvania, and life continued. Micah taught Sarah everything he knew about carpentry. Evelyn taught her about books and learning and the importance of education. Together, they taught her about courage, about choosing right over easy, about the long struggle toward justice. Pennsylvania, 1880. Micah was 71 when the sickness took hold. Pneumonia, the doctor said. Not uncommon in men his age. He might recover, or he might not. They should prepare for either possibility. Evelyn refused to prepare for anything except his recovery. She sat beside his bed day and night, reading to him, holding his hand, reminding him of everything they'd built together. Sarah came home from her teaching position in Philadelphia, bringing her husband and their infant son. They crowded into the small house, filling it with family. On a quiet evening in March, as snow fell gentle outside the window, Micah woke from a fever dream and found Evelyn beside him. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Hey, yourself." She squeezed his hand. "You gave us a scare. Sorry about that. Don't apologize. Just get better." He smiled. "I'll do my best." He looked around the room. "Where's Sarah?" "Downstairs with the baby. Do you want me to get them?" "In a minute. First, ... He shifted, trying to sit up. Evelyn helped him, propping pillows behind his back. "First, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "Thank you, for everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For risking everything. For building this life with me." His eyes filled with tears. "I got to be free because of you. I got to be a father, a husband, a craftsman who owns his own work. I got to dream and see those dreams come true. That's all because of you." "It's because of both of us," Evelyn said firmly. "You were brave first. You had the courage to write back when you should have stayed silent. You had the strength to run when staying seemed safer. Don't you dare give me all the credit. Stubborn teacher. Stubborn carpenter." They smiled at each other, the same joke they'd shared for 40 years. Still funny. Still true. "Read to me," Micah asked. From the letters. Evelyn retrieved the box they kept in their bedroom closet. The original letters, carefully preserved all these years. She opened it and pulled out the first one Micah had ever written. "Miss Evelyn, I received your note. I reckon I should not answer, but your words were kind." She read aloud while snow fell and the fire crackled and their granddaughter slept downstairs. She read their whole story, the fear and hope, the risks and rewards, the long journey from slavery to freedom. When she finished, Micah was crying silently. "We did good," he said, "didn't we? We lived a life worth living." "The best life," Evelyn agreed. "And it's not over yet. You're going to get better, and we're going to keep going. We have more years ahead. Maybe, but if we don't," he squeezed her hand. "If we don't, I want you to know I'd do it all again. Every risk, every fear, every moment. It was all worth it." Micah did recover, though he was never quite as strong afterward. He could no longer work in the shop, but he sat in a chair by the window and taught his grandson Sarah's boy about wood and grain and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. He lived 3 more years, long enough to see that grandson take his first steps, long enough to watch Sarah become a principal at a school in Philadelphia, long enough to know their story had taken root and would continue growing long after he was gone. When he died in 1883, it was peaceful. Evelyn was beside him, holding his hand, and his last words were, "Thank you for seeing me." She buried him in the Meadowbrook Cemetery, beneath an oak tree he'd always loved. The headstone read simply, "Micah Freeman, 1809 to 1883, carpenter. Father, Freeman, Pennsylvania, 1895." Evelyn lived another 12 years after Micah's death. She continued teaching until her hands were too unsteady to hold a pen, then spent her days with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the world he'd helped build. She died quietly in her sleep at age 76, and they buried her beside Micah beneath that same oak tree. Their headstones stood side by side, marking 2 lives that had been intertwined since that first letter hidden behind tools. Before she died, Evelyn made sure the letters were given to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. She explained their significance, their journey, their testament to love and resistance in the darkest times. The curator, who received them, wept as she read through them. "These are extraordinary," she said. "These need to be preserved, shared, studied." "They will be," Evelyn said. "That's why I'm giving them to you, so the story doesn't die. So people remember that even in impossible circumstances, human beings can choose love over hate, courage over fear, freedom over chains." Present-day Marcus Webb carefully placed the last letter back in the box. The afternoon had turned to evening, shadows lengthening across the abandoned cabin floor. He and Tommy sat in silence, letting the weight of what they'd read settle over them. "That's," Tommy began, then couldn't find words. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "That's exactly what it is." He looked down at the box, at the letters that had survived more than a century and a half of history. Letters that had been hidden, buried, preserved, and finally discovered again. Micah's words, Evelyn's courage, Sarah's legacy, all of it contained in these fragile pages. "What do we do now?" Tommy asked. Marcus thought about it. About Micah building cradles for free children. About Evelyn teaching former slaves to read. About Elijah writing down his story so it wouldn't be forgotten. About Ruth coming back to remember. About Sarah carrying the story forward. "We make sure people know," he said finally. "We contact the Historical Society. We preserve these letters proper. We tell this story the way it deserves to be told." He stood slowly, cradling the box like it was made of glass. Because Micah and Evelyn were right. Stories matter. Truth matters. And this particular truth needs to be heard. They packed up carefully, marking the exact location where the box had been hidden. Marcus took photos, documented everything. This was too important to risk losing. As they walked back to the truck, the plantation grounds quiet around them, Tommy said, "Do you think they made it? Really made it? I mean, do you think they got the life they wanted?" Marcus looked back at the ruins of the slave quarters, then up at the sky where the first stars were appearing. "I think they made it as much as anyone can. They built something real, something that lasted. That's all any of us can hope for." He placed the box gently in the truck bed, cushioned with blankets. Micah and Evelyn's story was no longer hidden beneath floorboards, no longer locked in darkness. It was coming into the light, where it belonged, where it had always belonged, and somewhere in the space between memory and hope, between past and future, to people who dared to write letters when writing was dangerous, who dared to love when love was forbidden, who dared to run when running meant death, could finally rest. Their story would be told. Their courage would be remembered. Their love would endure. That was the promise Marcus made as he drove away from the old plantation, the box secure beside him. That was the promise he would keep. Because some stories are too important to let fade, some loves are too powerful to be forgotten, and some truths need to be spoken, over and over, until everyone hears. This was one of those stories. And now, finally, after more than 150 years of silence, it would be heard. Epilogued, the Pennsylvania Historical Society held a special exhibition 6 months later. The letters were displayed behind glass, carefully preserved, with transcriptions beside them so visitors could read every word. The exhibition was called Hidden Voices, Love and Resistance in the Antebellum South. It drew thousands of visitors. Scholars studied the letters, learning about daily life on plantations, about the Underground Railroad, about the complex relationships that existed in impossible circumstances. Students read the letters in classrooms, discussing courage and choice and the long arc of justice. Descendants of Micah and Evelyn came to the exhibition, Sarah's great-great-grandchildren, now scattered across the country, each carrying part of the story forward. They stood before the letters, reading words written by ancestors they'd never met, and they cried, not from sadness, but from recognition, from understanding that they existed because two people had dared to hope, when hope seemed foolish. One of the descendants, a young woman named Hope Freeman, an engineer from Chicago, placed her hand on the glass case and whispered, "Thank you, for being brave, for surviving, for making this life possible." The letters couldn't answer, of course, but they didn't need to. They'd already said everything that mattered. They'd said, "We loved, we fought, we won." They'd said, "Freedom is worth any risk." They'd said, "Tell our story, remember us, carry us forward." And now, after so many years hidden beneath floorboards, the story was finally being told, the way Micah and Evelyn had always hoped it would be, with honesty, with respect, with recognition that their love, forbidden and dangerous and real, had changed the world in ways both small and profound. One letter at a time, one brave choice at a time, one life built on hope at a time. until the darkness couldn't hold them anymore, and the light came streaming in.